Welcome to Anews. I'm Livestream. You're watching Türkiye Diplomacy. We're seeing major developments on several fronts, from Gaza to Tehran, from northern Syria and to Europe. In Gaza, a U.S.-backed ceasefire has entered a new phase with plans for international oversight and rebuilding, even as Hamas has not agreed to disarm, and some Israeli leaders warned the fighting could return after a war that killed more than 71,000 Palestinians. Tensions are also rising between Washington and Tehran, with Iran warning that any threat to its supreme leader would mean all-out war after President Trump called for new leadership in the country. In Syria, a landmark deal between Damascus and the SDF is shifting control of key regions, with Turkey backing the agreement and calling for the full removal of terrorist groups. And in Europe, a new dispute is brewing as President Trump links tariffs to U.S. demands over Greenland, prompting European leaders to say sovereignty is not up for negotiation and to prepare economic retaliation.
European leaders held an emergency meeting on Sunday after U.S. President Donald Trump threatened sweeping new tariffs on some NATO allies unless Washington is allowed to buy Greenland. The EU has rejected the demand as blackmail and is preparing retaliatory steps while urgently pushing for diplomacy. Officials say the bloc could impose counter tariffs on around $108 billion of U.S. goods, while also considering the use of a tougher anti-coercion tool that could restrict American access to European markets. The crisis is expected to dominate both the upcoming EU summit on Thursday and talks at the World Economic Forum in Davos this week, which Trump is due to attend. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez warned that any U.S. military move on Greenland would fracture NATO and be a big boost for the Kremlin.
First, because it would in some way legitimize Putin's invasion and his unilateral action and questioning of Ukraine's territorial integrity. And second, because I very much fear that if such an invasion of Greenland by the United States were to occur, it would spell the death certificate of NATO.
Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen said dialogue with Washington remained open through a new trilateral working group involving Denmark, Greenland, and the United States.
The talks were constructive, and where we also decided to continue working on it and see if we could find a solution that leads to President Donald Trump abandoning the idea of owning Greenland. That secures Greenland's sovereignty, the Danish kingdom's territorial integrity, while at the same time accommodates reasonable U.S. expectations and requests. And that is what we agreed.
8 European nations issued a joint statement offering full solidarity with Denmark and Greenland and warning that tariff threats risk a dangerous downward spiral in transatlantic relations. The dispute has also unsettled markets, raising doubts over recent U.S. trade agreements with the EU and Britain. Monday morning trade in Asia saw the dollar dip against other major currencies, while gold and silver, often seen as safe havens, jumped to new record highs. Analysts say the crisis has now escalated into one of Denmark's most serious foreign policy challenges in decades, raising questions about NATO cohesion and Europe's ability to respond collectively. Public frustration is growing in Denmark and Greenland, where residents say they will not be pressured over territorial integrity.
I think he has lost his mind. I hope that there soon will be some more clever people in the States who will tell him, no, it's not going to work, this thing.
EU leaders say they remain willing to engage, but insist Europe will not be coerced. With Trump's February deadline for imposing the tariffs fast approaching, the next round of talks will determine whether the dispute eases or heads toward a broader confrontation.
Let's take a look at this news report, and we'll be right back.
Bölgemizde terörün devri tamamen kapanmıştır. Ateşkes ve tam entegrasyon anlaşmasının gerekleri süratle yerine getirilmeli. Hiç kimse bir kere daha yanlış hesap yapmamalıdır. Kuzeyini işgal altında tutan silahlı unsurların provokasyonlarına rağmen emir komuta zinciri içinde hareket eden Suriye ordusu başarılı bir sınav vermiş, haklıyken haksız duruma düşecek eylemlerden özenle kaçınmıştır. Suriye hükümeti müzakereyi önceleyen politikasıyla tahriklere açık bir sorunu olabilecek en az hasarla çözüme kavuşturmuştur. Tüm bunların Suriye'de kalıcı barış, huzur ve istikrar adına çok kıymetli kazanımlar olduğuna inanıyoruz. Toprak bütünlüğü haiz, bir ve beraber Suriye'nin tüm bölgemizin refahı için vazgeçilmez olduğu inancındayız. Biz Suriyeli kardeşlerimizin önü de ufku da bahtı da açıktır. Suriye halkının kardeşi, komşusu ve kara gün dostu bir ülke olarak bunu sabote edecek hiçbir teşebbüse müsaade etmeyiz. Terörsüz Türkiye sürecimizin gayesi, hedefi, menzili işte budur. Terörsüz bölge idealinin altını çizmemizin sebebi aynı şekilde budur. Halep'in, Rakka'nın, Deir ez-Zor'un ve diğer Suriye şehirlerinin sokaklarından yansıyan fotoğraflar Suriye halkının barış özlemini de gösteriyor. 13,5 yıl boyunca büyük acılar çeken, çok ağır bedeller ödeyen, yüz binlerce evladını şehit veren bir halk, umudu yeniden kuşanmakta, hayata yeniden sarılmakta, artık savaş istemediğini açıkça beyan etmektedir. Her ne sebeple olursa olsun, kimsenin bunu görmezden gelme, hele bu umut iklimini dinamitleme hakkı yoktur.
Iran's president warned on Sunday that any U.S. strike would trigger a harsh response from Tehran after an Iranian official in the region said thousands of people had been killed in nationwide protests.
Iran's president warned on Sunday that any U.S. strike would trigger a harsh response from Tehran after an Iranian official in the region said at least 5,000 people, including about 500 security personnel, had been killed in nationwide protests. Sparked last month in Tehran's Grand Bazaar over economic grievances, the protests swiftly turned political and spread nationwide. The protests drew participants from across generations and income groups calling for the end of clerical rule. Protests dwindled last week following a violent crackdown. U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened to intervene if protesters continued to be killed on the streets or were executed. Trump said in an interview with Politico on Saturday, quote, "It's time to look for new leadership in Iran." Iran indicated on Sunday it might go ahead with the execution of people detained during the unrest, and with its clerical rulers facing mounting international pressure over the bloodiest unrest since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, is seeking to deter Trump from stepping in. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian on X warned that Tehran's response, quote, "to any unjust aggression will be harsh and regrettable." He added that any attack on the country's supreme leader is, quote, "tantamount to an all-out war against the nation." On Saturday, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei branded Trump a criminal, acknowledging several thousand deaths that he blamed on, quote, "terrorists and rioters linked to the U.S. and Israel." The Iranian official told Reuters that the verified death toll was unlikely to increase sharply, adding that those taking to the streets had been supported and equipped by, quote, "Israel and armed groups abroad." The clerical establishment regularly blames unrest on foreign enemies. U.S.-based rights group HRANA said on Saturday the death toll had surpassed 3,300, with nearly 4,400 cases under review. The group said that more than 24,000 arrests had been confirmed.
A top political analyst in Denmark has said that the economic weapon is the best option Europe has as 8 European nations scramble to find a response to President Donald Trump's threat of 10% tariff for opposing American control of Greenland.
The word that we need to use is unprecedented. This idea that the United States is now threatening its European allies with economic tariffs explicitly over its desire to get control over Greenland. It's one thing if there is threats of tariffs back and forth over the Atlantic, over disagreements over trade practices and regulations. That's sort of, normal to some extent. But to have the tariffs, the tariffs and the threat of tariffs motivated by a desire to acquire territory from one of the US's treaty allies, I think that is completely unprecedented. And to be honest, a little outrageous, and that's of course why we're seeing the response from European countries saying enough is enough. This is one bridge too far for us, and this time we can't just give in to Trump's demands. We're going to have to try and stand our ground. I mean, the economic weapon is the best option Europe has. So tariffs directed back at Trump, if they're smart, probably directed at Trump's allies, tech people in Silicon Valley, find a way to try and hit the people that are Trump's support base rather than some of the demographics of the states that are already against Trump on this matter. That, of course, can be difficult, but we'll see. I mean, the EU has the ability to really strike back with force if they want to, and it'll hurt European economies, it'll hurt American economies. The challenge for Trump is he has midterms coming up, and it's not going to help him if the US goes into more of an economic recession or more of an economic turmoil than is already the case.
President Donald Trump reasserted that the United States needs Greenland for national security and said a newly appointed special envoy would lead the charge, drawing sharp criticism from Denmark and Greenland.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time.
There are other possible reasons for why Donald Trump may want Greenland. Minerals has also been mentioned, especially rare earth minerals. Now, Donald Trump himself said that this was less important than security, but nevertheless, let's look at the minerals. Rare earth minerals. The problem with resource extraction in Greenland is this. Greenland is a rich country in terms of natural resources. However, it is very expensive to extract it. So that means that even though that there are a lot of resources there are a lot of resources to be had, it may not be profitable to ever extract a large quantity of those resources. In practice, this has meant that the Greenlandic government has been very willing to try to bring in American companies to conduct searches and extraction of these resources. But as of yet, it has been met with fairly limited results. When it comes to concrete projects, American companies have been very cautious in entering negotiations with Greenland, simply because the business case just hasn't really been there in a lot of cases. We have a third possible argument, which is sort of an argument going more to a MAGA approach to the world, make America great again, or make America greater, perhaps even, right? So this idea of territorial expansion, and perhaps the idea that Trump has the possibility then of going down in history as one of the presidents that expanded the US. And I think this kind of motivator, I think both Copenhagen and Nuuk, both the Greenlanders and Danes, they very much hope that this is not a prime motivator for Donald Trump, because if it is very, very hard to do anything about it in terms of reaching a compromise. How do you compromise with that, right? The US would be fully capable of handling the problem militarily. If the US was to invade Greenland, there would be little that Denmark or Greenland or indeed the European powers could do to stop the US. However, in terms of politics, the consequences would be enormous, really. The Danish Prime Minister recently mentioned that it would likely mean the end of NATO. And I would tend to agree.
President Trump's intensified push to wrest sovereignty over Greenland from fellow NATO member Denmark has prompted the European Union to weigh lifting sanctions on its own.
I think it would be very unwise.
United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Monday said Europe should not retaliate against any measures the U.S. takes in their dispute over Greenland, as President Donald Trump's intensified push to take control of the island threatens to reignite a trade war with Europe. Speaking on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, Switzerland, Bessent urged Europe not to doubt Trump's intentions.
And I think everyone should take the president at his word.
Trump is expected to meet global business leaders in Davos on Wednesday. His threat to implement a wave of increasing tariffs on 8 European nations until the U.S. is allowed to buy Greenland has rattled European industry and sent shockwaves through financial markets. Investors fear a return to the volatility of 2025's trade war, which only eased when the sides reached tariff deals in the middle of the year. Norwegian and German leaders say they will try to meet with Trump this week in Davos to discuss the dispute. EU leaders will also discuss how to respond at an emergency summit in Brussels on Thursday. One option is a package of tariffs on $108 billion of U.S. imports that could automatically kick in on February 6th after a 6-month suspension. Another option is the anti-coercion instrument, which has never yet been used and which could limit access to public tenders, investments or banking activity, or restrict trade in services, including digital ones. The EU said it was continuing to engage at all levels with the U.S., but said the use of its ACI was not off the table.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan told Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara that Turkey will deepen its support for Damascus, stressing counterterrorism, unity, and territorial integrity as pillars of Syria's future stability.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan told Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara during a phone call that Turkey will continue to strengthen its support for Syria, particularly in the fight against terrorism, underscoring Ankara's key role in safeguarding Syria's unity and territorial integrity. Erdogan and al-Shara discussed recent developments in Syria, with the Turkish leader stressing that the complete removal of terrorism from Syrian territory is essential not only for Syria but for the stability of the entire region. Erdogan underlined that Ankara attaches great importance to Syria's territorial integrity, unity, cohesion, stability and security, adding that Turkey's support to Syria in multiple fields, especially counter-terrorism, will continue to increase. Highlighting Turkey's long-standing engagement in Syria, Erdogan said that Ankara remains committed to playing a constructive role in restoring state authority, preventing fragmentation and ensuring that all terrorist groups are eliminated from Syrian soil. The call came hours after al-Shara announced a comprehensive ceasefire and integration agreement between the Syrian government and the YPG, aimed at restoring state authority in the country's northeast. Turkish officials have repeatedly said that dismantling terrorist structures in Syria is a prerequisite for lasting peace and regional security, and that Turkey will continue working closely with Damascus to preserve Syria's sovereignty and support a unified, stable future for the country.
The deal that has been signed by the Syrian government and the SDF will dismantle YPG militants and reintegrate northeastern Syria with the rest of the country.
This is a big political victory for President Ahmed al-Shara and his government in Damascus. Since taking power in December 2024, he has struggled to reassert the government's full authority across the war-torn country. And now he has the vast majority of Syria in his hands. SDF forces will reintegrate with the Syrian military and police, and high-ranking members will apparently get high-ranking roles with the government as per the agreement. This will also be a major economic lifeline for Damascus. Eastern Syria, where the Kurds have had control for over a decade, is home to strategic oil and gas fields. The Syrian government will also have access to the Euphrates River and the dams and border crossings. Syria has struggled to rebuild the country after over a decade of war, generate electricity and improve life for millions of people struggling with poverty. Implementing the agreement will not be easy. There are a lot of items in the agreement and there's no clear timeline on how they'll be implemented. This is reintegrating 3 large provinces in eastern Syria after all. It also addresses some tricky subjects, most notably the Al-Hol camp and other prison facilities that are holding ISIS extremist fighters and their families. The Kurds have guarded these prisons and handled this file for a long time, but under the agreement, it has to be handed over to Damascus.
To discuss the latest developments on what's happening in Syria, let's bring in Dr. Mehmet Çelik, who is the editorial coordinator of Daily Sabah. Dr. Mehmet, good to have you back on Turkiye's Diplomacy.
Thank you, Omar.
Dr. Mehmet, of course, this is a big moment for Syria, for Ahmed al-Shara, and for the Syrian government itself, now that this ceasefire agreement has been signed. But how is Turkey looking at all the latest developments that have been ongoing in Syria?
Well, Omar, since the beginning of the Syrian war, Turkey has closely followed the incidents in Syria, be it in the first phase and then during the Assad regimes of oppression in the country, or even after fall of the Assad regime in December 2024. Since then, also, Turkey has been following the events very closely, the incidents in Aleppo, the March 10th agreement, or all the way to today. All the events that take place in Syria matter for Turkey. Why? Because Turkey shares a very long border with Syria along its southern borders. And what happens, the instability in Syria directly affects Turkey at many different levels, be it through security be it through humanitarian aspect, or even in terms of social and economic aspects. What happens in Syria has a direct influence into Turkey's domestic dynamics. For that reason, the latest developments, especially against the YPG terrorist groups, are followed very closely by Turkey, and Turkey has since then said that we do not want a terror corridor along our borders in northern Syria. So this is why Turkey, following 2016, had launched cross-border operations. But since the fall of Assad regime, Turkey had extended a diplomatic hand to the YPG, saying that, look, you lay down arms and integrate into the Syrian, the new Syrian state, and let's solve this issue through peaceful means, and let's extend the terror-free Turkey initiative into Syria as well, because the YPG is, of course, linked to the PKK terrorist organization, and without their laying down arms and their integration to Syria, this whole project, which sees not only stability for Turkey within its borders, but Turkey sees this terror-free initiative as a wider regional plan. So the YPG had to integrate, and this is why Turkey, for a very long time, waited that that March 10th agreement will be applied, will be actually put to work, and the YPG will lay down arms and integrate into Syria. But this unfortunately didn't happen. And in Aleppo, for example, where they had to withdraw, they violated the agreement for over 100 times. And because the time has come now, because the Syrian side sees no longer that willingness from the YPG to integrate into Syria, with their maximalist demands, YPG dragged its feet, and time has come that this could be no longer tolerated. And the Syrian army has been making moves towards the east to clear out YPG elements, to establish that sense of unity that is needed for a state, that unified authority over the borders and over energy sources, over trade routes, in any case, over the country's jurisdiction had to be, established. But for Turkey, this is, as I said, is very important, and Turkey is supporting the Syrian army in this process because the YPG has this, I think, aim of establishing a terror corridor along its borders, which Turkey doesn't have, for a very long time, for many years, said that they will not accept. This is why Turkey is supporting this new process that the Syrian army is, launching operations against the YPG. I think that this is very important, but the agreement that, as we heard from the media that the YPG has refused so far in the past couple of days when YPG leader was supposed to meet Ahmed al-Shara, which didn't take place. And in any case, it was postponed, and we know that that meeting took place yesterday. But so far, the YPG is continuing that insistence that they have maximalist demands which are not going to be accepted by the Syrian army, as Syrian armies now have more confidence over its territory. But in addition to that, I think it's important to highlight the U.S. position on the YPG and the U.S. position on Syria's future. The U.S. wants a unified and a Syria that can rebuild itself, and YPG is a roadblock right now for that. And the U.S. position on YPG is also has changed, which they no longer, although they have supported them over the years with very strong military support. I think that political rhetoric has also changed with regards to how they position YPG for Syria's future. For Turkey, all these developments are followed by very closely because the YPG presence does not only pose a threat to Syria's unity, but also it's a very strong security threat for Turkey along its borders. So Turkey has already said that they will not allow, but they had given time to YPG to come to the table through peaceful means, but this unfortunately didn't take place. Why? Because the YPG is instigated not only by other actors in the region, but also different power groups within the PKK, which has strong influence over the YPG, do not want to let go of that power grip over, let's say, energy sources in northeastern Syria.
Dr. Mehmet, let's talk about the Board of Peace for Gaza. Now, the second phase of the ceasefire has started, according to President Trump, but we barely saw anything happening from the first phase. There were so many things that were supposed to happen. We didn't see that happen. Humanitarian aid is still not reaching the Palestinians. The hostages and the prisoners, they were exchanged, but more or less, we didn't see any concrete solutions for the Palestinians. How are you viewing this new Board of Peace, Mehmet? Because, when we look at the founding members, there's Jared Kushner, there's Tony Blair, and then Turkish Foreign Minister. He's also there in the executive committee. Are you viewing this as a mission initiated by President Trump to serve his own interests in the Middle East?
Well, without interest, no actors would take such a role. But nevertheless, I think that the first phase was a good news in the first place because it would stop an ongoing genocide, airstrikes, and basically bullets killing people, civilians. But it didn't actually, that good news didn't actually materialize in a way that the deal was supposed to happen. The exchange of prisoners did take place to a large extent, but humanitarian access, for example, is very restricted. There's still people dying of, due to harsh winter conditions because they have no proper shelter, or there's still people dying because of malnutrition, perhaps, or through restricted medical access of medicine, let's say. But in addition to that, I think the people in Gaza are still facing the killing machine of Israel, which is now slowed down the pace due to this agreement. The second phase, on the other hand, is still, I think, although there is this peace board, executive board, and then there is the advisory board, it's still being formed. And how this will take the last shape, I think it's still very up in the air because, yes, Mr. Fidan is in the advisory board, and Donald Trump invited Mr. Erdogan to the executive board. China was invited. So it is still being formed. But I think one of the main criticism here is that there is the absence of Palestinians in this decision-making process. And this Palestinians agency for their future must be included in this process. And, this as part of this second phase, that International Stabilization Force task force is also still not formed. What will their role look like? How that force will be formed? What will be their limits? And I think these are all still up in the air and vague. Nevertheless, I think the fact that there is still an attempt, if the Palestinian agency is included, if the roles are more tangibly defined, and a future for Palestinians is really actually the aim of this plan, and then it must include Palestinians in this decision making, and we can still, although we can approach it with a grain of salt and with that cautious optimism, it's still better than indiscriminate bombing on civilians. I am not saying that this is a good plan for Palestinians as it is right now, but it can turn into something that will lead to a two-state solution if the Palestinian agency is included. And I think at the bottom line, if Palestinians are seen as a people that are entitled to have their state formed and secured, then this plan will turn into something positive for them. And because the decision making right now is in the hand of the powerful states like the United States, if the United States vision sees a two-state solution, or acknowledges that the Palestinians are a people that they deserve to have their land, that they're entitled to maintain in their homeland, then this could perhaps be seen as something positive. As of now, to say that this is, for a better future for the Palestinians, be it in Gaza or elsewhere in the occupied territories, it's too early to say that.
Mehmet, Israel has voiced some dissatisfaction, saying that it wasn't coordinated with Israel and contrary to its policy, the composition of Gaza's executive board. And just recently, Prime Minister Netanyahu has also said that I don't want Turkish and Qatari soldiers in the stabilization force. How are you looking at those statements?
Well, of course, this is not something that the Israeli, government wants right now, especially including Turkey and Qatar, is not something they have voiced, and we see a little bit of friction between Donald Trump's vision for Gaza and for the occupied territories and Netanyahu government. But nevertheless, I think the maximalist demands, the maximalist plans by Israel, at some point they come into friction with the United States. I think the U.S. administration, and especially Donald Trump administration at the White House, do not want to see this becoming a big issue for its foreign policy. And Netanyahu's maximalist aims beyond Gaza are triggering that friction to become even more visible, especially, let's say, even in Syria, for example. For the Israelis, led by Netanyahu and their war cabinet, the ultimate good plan, I'm using that in quotations, what they would agree with is basically a Gaza without people, without Palestinians. Anything that would be allowing Palestinians to stay in their homelands and to stay in their home and protect their territory, or continue to live in their territory, or return back to their homes that they were exiled from, is seen as a non-negotiable, or something that will not accept very easily by Netanyahu's far-right cabinet. Nevertheless, I think that what took place since October 7, 2023 has, yes, it has, in a way limited, I would say, Netanyahu's maneuvering area, because now they are isolated. This perverse ideology that is, using a holy text through only one perverse interpretation of a holy text is no longer seen feasible by the international actors, and that is putting, in a way, a limit to maneuvering area of Netanyahu. The regional countries are also not necessarily okay with that for many reasons. Although some keep it quiet, although some voice their disagreement or their opposition louder. I think that reality on the ground and in the region and international politics does not serve the hands of Netanyahu and his maximalist plans for Gaza or even in the occupied territories or for the wider region.
Mehmet, I want to talk about Iran now because we've been following the developments there for the past 2 weeks. Thousands of people have been killed. There have been, the Iranian government says that there was foreign intervention. Then we have the United States, we have Israel. And just recently, the Iranian president said that if you attack our supreme leader, it's going to be an all-out war. How would you summarize the events from the past 2 weeks, Mehmet?
Well, I think it is no secret that there is external factors involved in these developments in Iran. This is something that I think, at a time where countries that are powerful or they have superior intelligence operations, they are able to intervene, invade, or carry out operations against presidents or instigate some sort of protest, etc., in different countries. This is the current momentum that we're going through in the international politics. Nevertheless, I think it is important to state that there is external actors involved on the ground, and this is not a secret anymore. But it is important to acknowledge that the Iranian government way of handling the situation within its borders, and this is not a problem of today, but it is. It is a problem of decades that must be addressed within Iran by the Iranians, and they need to find a way to reconcile or close the gap between the regime, between the government, and those who find problems with the way the state is governing itself. So, but this should be left to Iranians to solve among themselves without the external actors trying to interfere, involve, or instigate the situation there. I mean, the economic hardships or some sort of social and political issues that Iranians have must be, I think, is solved and worked through by the Iranians themselves without external actors through intelligence operations to change the regime in Iran.
Mehmet, my final question, you just said changing the regime. There's one person who's been advocating for regime change, and that's Reza Pahlavi. And we've seen within the Iranian diaspora as well, and also within Gen Z protesters, that they want him to return back to Iran. What are your views on him? Do you think he has enough support?
Well, I'm not sure if he has enough support. And in fact, he may even see some sort of backlash because of his very close ties to the Israeli side. And then for when we look at Reza Pahlavi, yes, he's the Pahlavi, the son, when he's becoming more popular among some segments of society in Iran and even in the diaspora. But we should not forget that he's not the only actor in that race to lead the transition in case there was a regime collapse. But I don't think that's very feasible at the moment.
Dr. Mehmet Çelik, thank you so much for that analysis and for being a part of Türkiye's Diplomacy.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.